So in this video, we are going from this saddlebag to this saddlebag. This is the Viking Bags XL Stallion, I believe slanted, lamellar leather wrapped hard saddlebag. And this is pretty much the largest bag that they make. It's pretty sizable compared to the medium that I just showed, and I'll put them up here kind of one in front of the other just so that you can kind of see the size comparison between the two. So there you go right there. I mean, you've got, about 3 or 4 inches on the back that's made up. You've also got an additional, what I would say would be another 2 or 3 inches on the top. And of course it comes up a little bit taller in this area here. And then just even the difference in the width of them as well. The other nice thing about the larger saddlebags, these actually open outward away from the bike, which is really nice. Whereas the medium ones opened up toward the bike, which made it a little bit difficult, especially if you're getting like, a tool roll or something like that out of the saddlebag. You kind of have to apply a little bit more pressure to get that top lid opened so that you could get it out pretty easily that way. Now I will say, the quality of Viking bags, this is the second set that I've owned in probably about a 4.5 years time period. I got these shortly after I actually got the bike back in 2018, and these have held up amazingly well. These have, I would probably say, have been on the bike for probably about 35,000 miles or so, something like that. And the stitching has stayed intact. The leather has stayed intact as well. This, I think, is also, it's not a soft leather saddlebag. This is another leather wrapped, but it's still not considered like one of the hard bags as they would define it. But had this as a throw over version first because I didn't want to hard mount it, just because of having to take it on and off again every time that I've taken it for service or something like that. It was just easier to do it as a throw over. I don't even know if they offer that option with the bags or whether it's just primarily for the smaller sizes. It may just be for the smaller sizes. But that is kind of the size difference between these two. I've already got the bolts installed and swapped out because in the last video we did the turn signal relocation, and this was primarily for that reason, because the signals, I think, would normally actually come in probably around this area if we tried to install these on the bike as it was with the OEM placement and everything like that. So we're going to be installing these. We're going to be lining it up. We're going to be going over some, not really, I mean, this is a pretty straightforward install for anybody who's actually done this before, but for those who haven't, you've only got one shot at doing the measurements right, drilling the holes correctly and in the placement that you need them to be. Because once those holes are drilled, then you're kind of stuck with whatever that is, unless you try to patch it up somehow. But still, if it's not a solid plastic, they do also make these in a matte finish and a glossy finish that you could probably paint over. I had thought about doing that because I had done the factory color matching with the fairing on the bike from Memphis Shades, but since I already had the black leather saddlebags on it, and it looked really good with that, along with the black leather wrapped trunk, then I just decided to keep going with that. It still kind of gave it more of a, I guess, a rugged, natural, organic look to it, which I kind of like that look. So I just decided to go ahead and stay with that. But anyway, I'll point out some things with the bolts. If you've not ever done anything like that before, you're trying to determine what the right size is, how far away, and such like that. So let's cover that first, installing the bolts, and then we'll move on to lining the bag up and getting all that put into place. Okay, so first, there have been a lot of questions that I've seen on forums and different groups and such like that that ask, will these particular bags fit on an Arrow without turn signal relocation, maybe even a Phantom too. I can't remember offhand, but can these bags fit on a Shadow without turn signal relocation, which is what we did previously? And one thing that I will say is that most of the answers that you're going to get from Viking is going to be no, you have to do a turn signal relocation regardless of the size of the bag, which means using these last two bolts here. Now, it did take me some time, but I did find a video back whenever I had this question, and it did show that someone was able to install medium-sized saddlebags on their Arrow without having to relocate the turn signal. Now, it does leave it in a close proximity to the back portion of the fender where the turn signal would end up potentially interfering with the saddlebag. Keeping in mind too, if you're a solo rider versus someone who likes to ride to up or anything like that, then you also want to keep in mind the passenger pegs or floorboards like what I've got here. So the person actually has room to be able to, place their feet on there without hitting the saddlebags every time they get on or off. So I was able to mount this originally using these front two bolts here with the larger quick disconnect system. Now I think whenever I originally ordered the quick disconnect, quick connect, whatever they call it, then it did fit, but I think that they sent it to me by mistake. So what I think they were supposed to send to me was this particular quick connect bracket, which if we look at the hole placement on this, it comes up short of where it should. It will match with that one, or it will match with that one, but it will not match with both of them together. So you'd almost have to get the larger bracket, like this one that I had, and you can even just see the size comparison in those, how much larger one is than the other, even though those are, facing opposite directions. But still, you get the point. There's quite a significant size difference. But if you're going to mount a medium-sized bag, which you can do, onto the front two bracket posts, then this is the one that you have to use. And you notice these have silver up here, the aluminum, and these are the powder coated versions down here. Now I could use the same bracket on the back, but I think that it would probably be too bulky, and honestly it's a little bit heavier even than what this one is. So I'm gonna go ahead and use this one that is supposed to work with this model of bike instead of removing this one from these bags, because I can always reuse these in the future if I want to replace the bolts and put the longer ones back in. There's no problem there. That is interchangeable. It just takes some time to do that. But why would I have a reason to go back to smaller bags from a larger one? So the other thing is bolt sizes. Now, the factory OEM bolt sizes on this rear bracket is 28, for rounding up purposes, I'll just call it 30 millimeter length bolt OEM, and then a 40 and then a 40 here. So you got about a 10 millimeter difference. And this is going to be important whenever you actually go to get the bolts, because even though Viking provides hardware to mount the bags either by a quick disconnect or mounting it as a hard mount to your bike, every single time I've ordered them, they send it with like a 7 millimeter, and these are M10s, all three of them. And so, if you are going to go out and get your own hardware for these arrows, and I've looked at it for other years as well to see if they've kind of, maybe mixed it up, or they've crossed it over from one year to another, and even going back a few years, and even with the more modern models, they are still an M10. It is an M10 with a 125 pitch, and then you're just varying lengths by about 10 millimeters or so per thing. So originally and then that also is increased too if you've got the bracket that is attached for the luggage rack or the passenger seat here as well. That increases the bolt size, because this, whenever I ordered this originally, and this was going back maybe about 3 years ago, it did come with bolts that were longer than the original ones, because you're adding that additional distance from the fender. Then that increased by about 10 millimeters. I'm sorry if I'm going on about all of these numbers, but this is something that I wish that I could have found somewhere else, instead of having to, more or less find that myself and take the time to do it. So hopefully this will help somebody else who's also going to be hit with trying to find their own hardware. So originally, whenever I mounted this on the front, and it had to come out past the suspension, because the suspension is the only thing that does not move together on the back end of the bike. The exhaust moves with the fender itself, so there's no risk of that bumping or anything that way. The swing arm is the only thing really that will affect the distance between the saddlebag and it hitting anything down here or down here. Now, coming out, this time I went about 20 millimeters, including the lock spacer distance for the mounting system, about 20 millimeters out. So this is actually going to be a lot closer than what the original bags were that I had on here. The original bags, they were out probably about 50 millimeters, and now I brought it back into about 20 on these last two. So there is also a slight difference in the kind of spacers or spacing that you'll need to keep it in line, because if you don't have it perfectly in line, then you're going to be sliding it in at an angle, and it's going to really be difficult to remove them, to put them back on, or anything like that. So for these, I just went over about 20 millimeters. So from the back with the bracket on, it would be about 40, 50, 50. So going up 20 millimeters, then I ended up going with a 60 millimeter bolt on the back here. And I tried to get chrome spacers too from Ace, and they did not have any, but they didn't have any in a metric size. So these are actually 3/8 inch chrome spacers. I think it's a 3/8 by 3/8 chrome spacer. And then this one, I'm not certain, it's whatever one of the two sizes down from this one was. So with that combination, then both of these lined up perfectly to just be able to slide on the bracket. Holes for that. And then that slides in place, and then lock it, and then that'll lock it into place there. Now the only other thing, past that point of getting your bolts, making sure that they line up, you want to make sure that your bracket is sized first if you're using a quick connect system, because once you drill the holes for mounting it to the saddlebag, then that's kind of the point of no return for this kind of a project. So you want to make sure that your spacers are spaced correctly. They're not going to come undone. They don't have a lot of wiggle room. They're going to be solid whenever they are set onto the posts. And then from there, we can go on and mark our saddlebag and tape off where the perimeters of this bracket are going to sit. So then we can mark our holes and do the least amount of damage in mounting the bracket to the saddlebag itself. Now, the next thing is actually adjusting the placement of the saddlebag. Now, saddlebags that I got obviously have kind of that overarching curve that I wanted to kind of match up to the fender. I've got a reference image as well that'll put up on the screen of how that actually looks. Now, I was able to use the horizontal line on the outside of the lid to be able to kind of give me my my X axis there. And then kind of just rotating it. I will say it'll be easier if you've got somebody to be able to kind of hold it while you instruct, rotate it back, forward, lift it up a little bit or something like that while this plate is on, because then they've got a solid surface, you've got a solid surface to be able to adjust the sizing, or not the sizing, but the placement, the position of it while you're trying to do that. I also, because these are way larger bags, I also did set something down on the exhaust to be able to give it a little bit of distance, so that even though it will be exposed to the heat coming off of the exhaust while at a standstill, it will not be too close to touching the exhaust and end up damaging the bottom of it. So I haven't had any issues like that with my previous bags. Of course, those I had maybe about 2 to 3 inches or so of clearance so that it wasn't touching the exhaust pipe. So once you have got your saddlebag in the position that you want to, then I would recommend using masking tape, some sort of tape, nothing that has a very high tack or adhesive like duct tape or anything like that. Electrical tape may even work, but on dark bags it may be difficult to see. But taping off on the back while it's still being held into place, taping off these corners here and even underneath if possible, so that whenever you take this off, you go to drill your holes, then you can lay this down perfectly on top of it, do the marking for the holes, drill the holes, and then you've got it about as precise as what you can possibly get it for an install like this. So that is what we're going to be working on next, and then after that it's just a matter of mounting the bolts, fitting it on, and then doing the exact same thing to the other side. You want to make sure that whatever side you have the least amount of clearance. On this side, because we've got a 2 and a 2 exhaust, we don't have anything on the other side except for maybe the shaft drive that comes further down below this. Then you want to make sure that you size your saddlebag placement on the side that is the highest. So you've got enough clearance on this side and you're going to have enough clearance on the opposite side. They're both going to look mirrored. They're both going to look symmetrical in their placement. And you can use the drill hole templates from one to be able to mark through onto the opposing bag. So that's what we're going to work on next. Okay, so before getting started, I wanted to go over kind of the hardware that they provide. So I was incorrect. It's not a 7mm bolt. It's actually an 8mm bolt that they provide. So I've actually got like 2 different ones here. 10mm, but these are way too long to use on something like that. I mean, these look like they are, let's see here. These are 10mm by 80. So this would actually probably set your bike or your bags away from your bike, probably maybe about 30mm or so, something like that, before it actually got to the bracket itself. So, and also I don't know exactly what kind of, because this stuff comes from Pakistan, I don't really know what kind of quality these are. That's one other thing that I saw in a lot of reviews, that they ended up getting better bolts and hardware because some of these ended up snapping. So that's just something to consider. But you've got, goodness, how many of these bolts? You got about 4 each. 2 of the shorter ones, 4 of longer ones, then 4. They're all 1.25 pitch, so that's good. That's something I guess that they've changed since the last time that I had ordered some bags from them. So that's nice. And then you've got these spacers. Now these you cannot, from what I have been able to see, you cannot just pick these up at a hardware store. Now one of the issues with this is that both of these, I think, are the, once again, doesn't really make that much sense because you can't really use these bolts on these spacers. So you got this I'm guessing is probably for the hard mount, and then this must be if you're going for using the Quick Connect system. So the Quick Connect does come with the 8mm that will actually go into those holes. Now, what I ended up doing with my previous spacers, and I don't know if I'll actually use these or not. I'll probably just keep them as spares just in case. But what I ended up doing was using the step drill bit that I had used in my previous video to actually drill out these holes a little bit bigger. I found that that was easier. It was a lot cleaner than using actual drill bits to do that. Plus, this is narrow enough that if you do it from both sides, then it will eventually come into the same diameter in the middle of this thing. So if you do use these spacers, in order to get them to fit with the OEM bolt size, which you're pretty much beholden to, of the 10mm, then you're going to have to drill these out a little bit more. But I would advise using a step drill to do that, and either a vise, or I used vise grips with like rubber so that I didn't scratch these around the side and they would still hold into place. But just did it a little bit at a time. These things will get very hot as you're drilling through it. So, just toss it into a cup of cold water or something like that whenever you're done, so you don't burn yourself, and it'll cool it down faster. So I won't be using these, but I will be saving them just as kind of spare parts. And then the other thing is, if you are going to hard mount it, this is the kind of hardware that they provide you. Now, I got this with my other set of bags, and this is kind of an interesting little thing. So essentially, what you will end up doing is using these bolts that they provide here. These will attach at the top part of your fender, and then these will attach by this bracket at the just as a protection guard from your bags swinging into the wheels, or hitting anything that's actually a moving part on the back of the bike. So that's and then you just adjust them based on the pivot points here, and then you would either hard mount it, or if you ended up getting a bag that had like the throw over yoke to it, like what they used to have about 3 years ago. I don't know if they still do for some of their smaller bags. And then you just do these. Now the problem is that these will end up rusting over time. I think they're just like powder coated, but since they're close to the road, they're close to the dirt and grime, everything like that, they end up getting dirty, and then they end up rusting, because not a lot of this is stainless steel. And you could probably find replacement bolts and stuff like that would be of cleaner, longer lasting quality than these. But just working off of their hardware, and then of course you've got the 10mm bolts, the 8mm. That's not even 8mm. That's for the hard mount system right down here. That's more like a 6, I'm guessing. So we'll be using these washers for mounting this system. So be putting this over there, back in its box, along with those bolts and those washers, because that's what goes with that. They do provide instructions, tools that you need, how to go about doing it. Very, very high level overview. So just wanted to show you that as far as the hardware that they include. They do include a lot of hardware. So if you can't use these bolts on this particular project, you could probably find a use for them on other projects. So, getting back to saddlebag at hand, this is the right one. You saw in the picture, I already kind of lined everything up to be able to set my bracket in place here. Lay that down. So it'll essentially be like that. And then also along the top. then along the bottom, and then I can just go ahead and mark off down in here, and then these two spots where the bolts are going to go, and then I can get to drilling that out. Right, so now let's size up what we've got here. I'll go all the way to 3/8. Let's say. Okay. Here are the bolts that we're going to be using to screw the mount to this. So that's primarily what we need to be looking at as far as the size goes. To this side of it, and just a little bit larger there. Okay, so I did decide to go ahead and use a step drill bit for the remainder of the holes. It just seemed to be a little bit cleaner that way. I would just advise do it a little bit at a time, test to see if the screw can actually go through the opening there. Because you don't want too much room, but you don't want it to be too tight either to where you're trying to force it in there. So you will get a little bit of powder just from the plastic saddlebag structure itself on the inside. So you can just use like a can of compressed air or something like that, flip it on its side, blow it all around in there for a few seconds, and that'll get all of that out. So before we mount this, what we're going to do is we're going to bring the other saddlebag up, we're going to pop the lids open, and then we are going to mark through the inside going to the other bag where the holes need to line up on that one. So we're essentially using this as a template to drill the holes for our left side bag. Unlock both of them. There we go. Got that one. There's still a little bit more left down in there. So with both of these lined up side by side, then what we're going to do is going to take the smallest drill bit, or even if you wanted to, I guess you could even take a Sharpie marker, and I'm going to turn on some light in here so we can see. Just line them up back to back. And just kind of poke that through the holes that have been drilled. Try to keep it as straight as you can, I would say. And then we'll see how those marks come out on the opposite side. So we got one right there. And then we got another right there. And then Looks like there's a mark right there. Yeah, that feels about the same place on the other one. Mark right there. The other bracket and line this up down here, and then do the pilot holes for that, and then go through and do the rest of the drilling with the step drill bit. Definition. There's enough. Good. And we'll check out the inside. Some nice powder in there. Then we'll move on to installing all this. I do have some extra washers too if I need some, but these should hopefully be enough. Just need to find one more of those. It's probably around there. It is. Okay, so got 4 for each side. And then the only thing left to do is just to start bolting these in, and then we're done. And then we can mount them to the bike, and they're good for their first ride. Okay, and here are the bags mounted. Fit on beautifully. We have plenty of room back here for the turn signal. Probably just, I know I had mentioned in the previous video whenever I relocated this, maybe trying to get something to do that. I may see what I can find, but I don't think that it's really going to make that big of a difference because it's mostly hidden back behind the bags itself. But this, I mean, it definitely does kind of have more of a bagger look to this with the size of those. Still got plenty of room for the suspension, enough clearance in between the bag and the housing itself. One thing I did notice down here is that the helmet lock, which I don't use the helmet lock anyway with the bags on it, I may need to get a little bit longer bolts to readjust for that distance there. But overall, they fit really well. They look really well. They look really good. And now the only thing that I've got to do is just put the trunk back on the back, and it's ready to go. So this is kind of the third part in a 3-part series of pretty much rearranging and readjusting the back part of the bike to be able to accommodate turn signal relocation. And then also for the largest saddlebag installation that you can get on these, aside from going with something like a Harley Davidson bag from, you know, one of their baggers or a touring bike or something like that. One thing that I will say, a lot of Viking bags, saddlebags themselves, as well as their trunk, a lot of their primary products are very, very good quality. They're very well made. They do a great job at keeping your things dry inside, whether it's a saddlebag or even the trunk that I've got. They've always done a really great job of keeping your items safe, keeping them secure, As you can see, it's lockable. Holding up for, you know, long trips, short trips, commuting, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm very impressed with their product. I'm very impressed with their brand. The only thing that I would say, they really need to work on their hardware. Either give you an option to be able to select the kind of bolts that you know go on your bike. And it's very easy to find these types, whether it's on Partzilla, RevZilla, any site that has OEM parts that you can buy. You can always look up what kind of bolt sizes you currently have, even just for the diameter of it and for the thread pitch. That's two of the main things. Even if you get a longer bolt, you can always cut that down in size with a Dremel tool or something like that if you're handy with those. But aside from that, it goes on clean. It looks like it fits with the bike. And I imagine that probably if I had gone with a glossy or matte black finish with the same style, then it would have looked beautiful in a color match and really look like a typical bagger, you know, that you would get off the showroom floor. So anyway, that's all for this episode. If you like what you saw, or if you found any of this information helpful, then please like the video, share it, subscribe for any future modifications or maintenance content that I may put out. And if you do have any comments, if you've done this kind of an install before and there are some lessons that you learned along the way, please put them in the comments. I'd enjoy hearing about that, and also being able to share that information that way. So until next time, keep the shiny side up, ride safe.